Hi, my name is Kevin, and I collect old irons. Mrs. Potts was famous for her detachable handled irons, but what really made her famous was the marketing by Enterprise Manufacturing Company of Philadelphia. They employed a diversity of marketing techniques, but by far the most successful, surely, was the trade cards. The Victorians loved cards. They would leave calling cards as they visited friends. They introduced the concept of Christmas and Valentine's Day cards. And after the 1870s, no company in their right mind would not use trade cards. These were usually generic designs that might be repeated on any number of different companies, perhaps showing children at play, and the company name. The back was often blank. The people largely collecting these were the children, who would get their parents to bring cards home with them during their travels and business, and would then paste these things into scrapbooks. And these scrapbooks quite often turn up at the antique sales. There are two good sources for information about these cards. The first of these is in an Iron Talks issue number 11 from May-June 1997, and in an article by Bob Grossman on Mrs. Potts advertising trade cards, illustrates about 62 of these cards altogether. And the second source is from the Advertising Trade Card Quarterly, spring 1996, an article by Russ Massieri, and this covers the enterprise cards in general, of which there's about 130, something more than half of those being Mrs. Potts cards. The exact number of Mrs. Potts cards out there are unknown, but probably something like 80 or so. I have some 30 plus of these cards in my collection, and we have these framed and used in displays at various places in our B&B. I lack some of the early cards, and my colleague Jerry Fingerman has loaned me some of his cards to provide a better treatment of the irons in this video. Many companies made wide use of these cards, but perhaps no one made as effective use as the Enterprise Manufacturing Company. Enterprise had cards for many of its various choppers, grinders, shellers, stoners, seeders, sprinklers, stuffers, shavers, and so forth. The cards were made from 1875 to at least 1896, and probably past the turn of the century. These cards show the evolution of commercial lithography over that time. By far, the major subject of these Enterprise cards was the Mrs. Potts cold-handled satirns. The initial Potts satirin cards were woodcut engravings made with black ink on white paper. The earliest of these depict Chinese laundries and are rife with racial stereotypes. Right from the beginning, these cards have printing on both the front and the back, with the reverse being this cross design that is continued for some years. The earliest cards do not mention Mrs. Potts and may precede the October 1875 Enterprise purchase of the patent. These early cards are fairly rare, and when these come up on eBay often go for more than $50. There was a blitz of advertising associated with the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition in 1876 and shortly thereafter. Many of these cards have patriotic themes, and the Enterprise Potts cards employed humor, which I think made these especially popular. Here is an image, well, that could be Florence Potts herself, showing off her new cards to, well, everybody. Note here that Mrs. Potts gets prominent placement on the front and the back. Any distributor could have their own name and address printed on the back as well. The Philadelphia shipyard was at that time building ironclads for the Russian Navy, and so that image is here incorporated into a sad ironclad. There must have been more than 20 different designs of these black and white satirin cards. These are quite rare and only occasionally come up on eBay. From about 1878 to the early 1880s, there were several sets of cards that incorporated one or two colors in addition to the black and white. These sets may have been put out annually with a dozen in each set. The first of these cards included a green background color. Here is President Rutherford Hayes and Mrs. Hayes on a trip to Philadelphia, which would of course have to include a visit to Enterprise to buy some of Mrs. Potts' irons. Many of these cards compared the new Mrs. Potts irons with the old flat irons in humorous ways. This card was originally published as a black and white, then here lithographed green, and as we will see, these were further improved with subsequent generations. Note the burning shame on the left and the cold comfort on the right. The lithographed green cards were replaced perhaps a year later by a sepia and black set. Sepia is a brownish color. The artistic work on this set, which uses a different lithographer, is especially good. Here is, yes indeed, I think that's Uncle Sam, welcoming a group of immigrants who could of course only be here for one thing, Mrs. Potts' cold-handled sad irons. Here is another card from the sepia set with a passerby saying, "Why so sad, iron?" These cards continue the diagonal bars on the back. The third generation of colored cards, and I think we are getting into the early 1880s here, have a blue tint. I should tell you that with each of these generations, the cards are getting more common. I can often pick up these blue cards for $10 or less. I sought this card because I thought we might have Kate play the tune on her fiddle, but alas, the musical score is nonsense. The blue cards mark a transition to a new back design with a more prominent hand. This card is from a company in Westerly, Rhode Island. It would be interesting to see a study on how many stores are named on the back of these cards. Note that this card has some decoration in the top corners, which is a characteristic of that particular generation. Which brings us to what are called the four-color cards. This one is relatively simple, but is of interest to me as this is a general design that goes back to the early black and white cards and improved a bit with various of the generations since then. We saw this green card printed a few years before. The back lacks the decorations in the corners and has louder lettering. Best in use and cheap. These four-color cards occur in a set of 12 and are quite abundant. If you want to buy some of these, take your time. eBay is full of these at $40 or $80. That's much too high. Be patient. I have bought some of these for $6 or $8. Prices do vary with quality. Sometimes the cards are trimmed or have the backing that is damaged by the paste used in the scrapbook. I think these can be dated to 1882. Jumbo the Elephant arrived in the U.S. early that year. In amongst the Potts cards shown here are card sets of other Enterprise products that include Potts cards as well. These are often done by different lithographers and so in different styles. There are various variations of the hand. I think this one is the prettiest, and I can again thank Jerry Fingerman for his help on this. This one does not mention Mrs. Potts and includes mention of an 1896 patent on the back. This is the latest Potts card for which we have an approximate date. Some of the cards advertise these boxed sets, which no doubt made good wedding gifts. Again, Mrs. Potts is not mentioned, so this card likely dates after 1888, which is when the patent lapsed. Perhaps we will do a video on the boxed sets in due course. There was a special set of 15 cards made for the 1893 Columbian Exposition, also known as the Chicago World's Fair. These are quite intricate cards. Each shows some historical scene that incorporates an Enterprise product, a drawing of a building on the fairgrounds that may perhaps include that item on display, and some verse. Here we have a Plymouth Pilgrim scene with a woman using a Mrs. Potts iron and the woman's building shown at the bottom. The verse here reads, "When Alden wooed the fair Priscilla for his friend, in 1626 by Plymouth Rock's environs, the course of true love rough at first, at the end, as smooth as if they used the Enterprise sad irons." Kate says that's a terrible poem, but I well appreciate that we have a Mrs. Potts sad iron in poetry. And if you know of any other sad iron poems, please send to me, because I'm very much interested in poetry myself. As we are recording this video just after Thanksgiving, we would now be in the Christmas season. And I thought we might give the Victorians further credit by showing a Christmas-themed Mrs. Potts Sat-iron card. And here we have Santa Claus working hard on a special run to distribute Mrs. Potts Sat-irons throughout the world.